My name is Gil Santos, and I am right now the lead quant at RedStone. And I've been working in traditional finance for a while and joined crypto 2 or 3 years ago. And before I really talk about anything, I really need to contextualize you guys, because I understand that you probably don't know the news that recently happened, which was that RedStone, an Oracle provider, acquired the Credora network. And the reason why this is relevant is because I was developer at the Credora network and was working on the risk models there. Credora was, and still is, the lead risk ratings provider in the space. And we rated assets, we rated Morpho, we rated Euler. And the angle here about this partnership and this acquisition is that, okay, we have these amazing methodologies that I will talk about, and now we have a distribution channel, and now we have a team that is very talented, and we are ready to scale this. So, a little bit about RedStone. RedStone is the fastest growing Oracle today. We have over 100 clients, we support over 60 chains, and we secure over $4 billion in assets. You will probably know us from price feeds and data feeds in general. You'll see us on lending markets, you will see us on leverage protocols, staking, restaking, and yield products. And as I said, when we talk about data feeds, the feed that is most common is prices, right? But there can be other feeds, and this is what we're trying to get at. And there is a problem in this industry that Credora and both Credora and RedStone really realized, and you guys probably already realized this, and which is that it's very difficult to choose the right assets, the right lending, and the right vaults for your personal risk appetite. You can go on a vaults page and you can sort it by yield, and you will see the highest yield on top and just say, let's go, I'm going all in on this one. But what's the risk behind it? How do you measure it? What's the risk-adjusted yield? Those are things that we are trying to answer. And the problem is just getting worse and worse. We have DeFi proliferation going on. When we started with stablecoins, we had the 3 big players, USDC, USDT, we had DAI. Now we have other, Ethena and others, that are complexifying all this landscape, and we have more than 200 stablecoins at the moment. Real-world assets, the big buzzword. Again, we started with T-bills, now we have private credit on-chain, which is very, very good, but again, more complex and more stocks coming in, reinsurance, refactoring, all these different type of products that are available for you, but how do you measure risk? Finally, DeFi vaults. We've seen a couple of keynotes about it. We started with Aave, Compounder, Spark. Now we have permissionless vaults, Morpho, Euler, and you have risk curators that are trying to maximize these yield opportunities and just trying to create products that agglomerate these permissionless vaults. So the problem is clear. What is the solution? The solution is risk ratings, obviously. The risk ratings is an approach where we basically take different risks. We look at network, counterparty, smart contracts. Depends on what you're really assessing. But what you're really doing is you are mixing this all in, taking quantitative measurements and methodological methods to assess the risks individually, and then put them all on one single scale that is used to compare risk across different products. You've probably have seen the scale on the left, right? This scale rings a bell. It's what S&P, what Moody's, and other rating agencies do. And what we've done is we've basically mapped our ratings to their ratings, and we've created a scale that is more easy to interpret, and that is more crypto-native, let's say, because it's tailored towards the risk that we see in crypto. So our hope and goal is to bridge this gap a little bit about institutions and crypto natives, and doing that by creating ratings that are very simple to use, that are consensus-driven and very transparent, right? So about these ratings and how do we assess things so different, like a Morpho market, from a stable coin? And how can we organize these items? So we've basically organized them into 3 different verticals that have different methodologies around them, but the really cool thing is that they are all under the same standardized scale. So we can compare the outputs. Assets is really anything that you can call like a stable coin, an RWA, a liquid staking or restaking token. And in there, what we want is to quantify the probability of default. Probability of default is answering the question, will this fuck up? And with that answer, you get part of the answer because you say, okay, this has a likelihood of a default event, but how much will I lose? That's the second variable, loss given default. And those familiar with traditional finance will recognize these metrics. So assets, we take this fundamental risk assessment, we break it into sub-methodologies, and we assess each one individually. Markets, the approach needs to be slightly different because you need to have some sort of forward-looking vision and you need to have a simulation framework. So what we've done is we've created a simulation framework using Monte Carlo simulations to calculate the probability of a significant loss. The significant loss is a loss that is the likelihood of having a loss over 1% of your deployed capital. Finally, vaults. Vaults are just like aggregated exposure to the underlying markets and assets. If we do correctly part 1 and part 2, part 3 is just aggregating these individual risks and also taking into account concentration, diversification, and other governance specific around the vaults. But you can see the value here because if you really do well the first part, the vaults part is super distributable very easily. And today, the nerd part is about markets. So what I'm going to go is into a little bit more on how this market methodology and how the simulation really works. So if you think about this as like making a potion, these are the ingredients that go into the market ratings. So put yourself in the shoes of trying to analyze the risk of only one Morpho market. On one Morpho market, for those of you who don't know, is you have a collateral, you have a loan asset, and you create a position with a certain loan to value. You want to assess the risk of, as a lender, losing that capital, right? So the main ingredients are these. I don't want to go into a lot of detail about each one of them, but maybe we can talk a little bit about a few. Market characteristics are the most obvious one. So if you go there, you will see different characteristics on different markets. You have some markets that have an LLTV that is different from others. But that alone does not tell us a lot because you have stable to stable markets where you can have really, really high LLTVs. And you have volatile markets where you have a volatile to stable pair. And that LTV can be a little bit lower. So you need to assess this as a whole. That's the key. Allocations distribution is also an interesting one. We've noticed that different markets have different allocation profiles. So the positions that are inside the market impact the result. If you have a certain market with all the positions really, really close to that threshold limit, at the little movement in the markets, in the price, you're going to have triggers. You're going to have liquidations happening. And that's no good. So the allocation distribution is important. And the final one I want to talk about is the collateral asset ratings. Collateral asset rating is what we, Credora, produced at the asset vertical. So you imagine a market, you have a collateral. You have that collateral will be rated by us, and you have a probability of default. If that collateral fails, that's going to affect the market, right? So we take that into consideration as well in our simulation framework. And because we got acquired by RedStone and because we are here with them, there's also a very interesting angle because during this work and during the times where we were just focused on developing these methodologies, we've noticed that the oracle characterization is very, very important in terms of how risky the markets are. Okay, so depends on how the oracle set up, you're going to have different risks. And you're probably, if you dig into like reports on like exploits, most of them will have this oracle was exploited line. And this is what we noticed as well for lending. So we've categorized them into 3 different buckets depending on the nature. And it doesn't necessarily mean that one is less risky than the other. Again, it always depends on the whole context. Dynamic oracles, you have a dynamic price feed between the loan and the collateral pair, and you're getting that price feed dynamically. This is typically used for most of the markets. Exchange rate oracles are kind of in the middle, where you have some part of the price that is dynamic and some part that is fixed. And you have hard-coded oracles that just rely on a fixed price feed. So you can have a market that is just basically a stable-to-stable market, and the price feed is just constant, just one. What does that tell you? That tells you that if there's a DPEG event or a default event on the loan-to-collateral pair, you're not going to get liquidations. And that doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. It's mostly used for low liquidity markets and smaller markets in general as well. Okay, so now the really nerd part. Let's dive into a little bit about the markets methodology and how we solved this problem with a simulation framework. Here, we basically have a 2-step simulation, okay? Again, let's put ourselves in the market shoes and look at a specific market in Morpho. You start with the collateral asset PDN rating, as I said before, you rate the collateral. Then you have a price simulation. And in this price simulation, the answer you're going to try to get at is how likely it is that I'm going to hit the LLTV trigger. So given a certain position, let's say you start at an LTV of 60, and you have the LLTV at 86, how likely, given the price movements in the future, it is that I'm going to get that trigger. This tells you how the likelihood of hitting that trigger, but then you have to ask another question, which is, okay, I have hit that trigger, how likely it is that I end up with bad debt? So meaning that liquidations did not work properly and you end up losing money. That's the answer we get from the second simulation, and that gets us to a probability of a significant loss. Price simulations, a little bit more into the weeds, but before I jump into this nerd part, I want to try to get a feel of how nerd you guys are. So who has heard about Monte Carlo simulations? Nice. Some, okay. So I can just briefly explain you. Monte Carlo is a simulation framework where you create a ton of random events and you measure the results. So imagine rolling a dice. If you roll your dice, if your dice has 6 sizes, you roll them 10,000 times, you're going to get eventually like 1 out of 6 in each. What we're trying to do here is creating the framework to have a simulation of price movements that starts with a few very specific conditions, and then you launch the simulation framework, and you see how likely it is that with those conditions you hit a certain target. What are those conditions? The most obvious one, pair volatility. Pair volatility tells you how likely it is that the price move historically, or implied volatility, you can use both, and how likely it is that the move happens on the central part of the normal distribution. So if you think about ETH to USD prices, you're going to have like a volatility around 2 or 3, depending on daily volatility and depending on the time, and that will lead to, on the image on the left, will lead to the center part of that. But we've also noticed something that is very important, which is that the central part of the simulations in the central movements are explained by normal movements, normal distribution, but in most of financial products, and crypto is no different, the tail events, so extreme events, are understated by normal distribution, because it's more likely to have, if you look at historical prices, you're going to see that those tail events happen more than what normal distribution suggests. So if they happen more, what means is that you're understating the risk, and we've built a model specifically for the tails to capture these market extreme events. And the final input is really the collateral default. So again, the likelihood of that collateral hitting a default event, and what's the loss given that default. With these ingredients, you can create the image that you see, which is basically a random movements of prices according to a starting LTV position and how likely it is that those scenarios reach the trigger. And if they reach the trigger, what happens? Let's think about, again, our little market at Morpho. Our market, you have a certain position opened, and you pass this loan-to-value that is the limit loan-to-value. What's going to happen is you're going to get liquidated. But if you think about it, not from a small position alone, but from all the exposure that is in that market, there are markets with huge exposures, right? So there are markets with huge exposures with very close to that limit. So it means that if there's a price movement and you are getting wrecked, the others are getting wrecked as well unless they act. That's why liquidity matters, and this is the question that we're trying to answer is, okay, at the moment of passing that trigger, you're going to have two things that factor in if the liquidation is successful or not. One is the price velocity, so how fast are we moving in terms of price move, and the second one is how much liquidity is available elsewhere. So how much liquidity is available for liquidators to act. So if you have like $1 million that passed this limit, that 1 million will have to be liquidated, and liquidators will want to use liquidity elsewhere. So what we do, we basically look at the slippage curves, and we define a point where that's what our assumption for liquidity at the moment of liquidation. And we discount it a bit based on volatility, based on competing sell pressure, and based on how much is actually being liquidated, right? So with that ingredient, we have our final bit of the simulation. And what we here do is just simply, we break the simulation into steps, and we emulate this liquidation process. So if you have 1 million in outstanding that is getting pushed over the limit and is getting liquidated, if you have 100,000 liquidity available, what's going to happen? The price will continue to move, and you're going to try to liquidate partial amounts, so 100,000. Price continues to move, liquidate again. Price continues to evolve. You see where this is going. This is going either one or two directions. Or the liquidation is complete, or you have actually bad depth. And this is something that, in our opinion, with the growth of TVL, will just get bigger and bigger because you have more amounts that are at risk and less liquidity, or the liquidity is not evolving the same way. So we need to consider that factor as well. Okay, nerd part is over. Let's go back to the general part. Why do we care? Why is the market methodology a thing? We care because this really serves as the foundation for vault-level risk assessment, okay? Again, if you look at a certain vault, you can have a rating for a vault, and that vault is the composition of each individual market and each individual asset inside that vault. Together with correlation, track record, governance, we can get this modular approach to risk, and this modular approach works for multiple lending markets. And finally, Why us? Why are we positioned to be leading this space, which is basically a space that is at the moment growing because you have on one side institutions that are ready to deploy capital, and on the other you have all these modular components and all these curators that need an external validation of their strategies. Today, we are present on Morpho. So our methodology rates around $4 billion in TVL. We are present with the biggest curators in the space, Stakehouse, RE7, MAV, and more. And the trend that we've seen was that the moment we started rating those vaults, the TVL evolution of those vaults was much bigger than the TVL evolution of the unrated vaults. So it's outperforming the other vaults in TVL, and it basically means that the ratings work as a stamp of approval for Morpho vaults. We are cooking Euler as well. Euler has a slightly different modular approach for those who are familiar with, and we plan to be live with those soon. And from here, the plan is really to continue to grow on the asset side as well, continue to rate more and more assets, and rate more and more vaults, because at the moment that you have all of your fundamentals ready, vaults is just aggregating those individual pieces. Thank you very much. I think we still have some time for questions.
Yes, I think so as well. I was just checking if there are any questions. Yes, there's a gentleman over there. If not, I will just walk there with the mic. Let's have a quick look. We have 1 or 2 questions. Here you go, please.
It's a wonderful presentation. I thank you very much for it. You started your talk with the buzzword of the season, the RWA. Would you say that quantifying risk that is linked to collateralized assets to RWA in crypto is going to be harder in terms of auditing the assets? Because nowadays when you do collateral, let's say, exposition ranking, you can clearly track where the assets are going, but when you tokenize the assets, the real-world assets, it's going to be much harder to audit actually whether the assets are there or not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. This is going to be, let's say, quite hard to quantify and to measure and to put it on a higher perspective to just put a risk rating on the collateralization ratio.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So our experience with RWA was really taking the same methodology we've been taking with stablecoins. And the risks that we see there are layered, right? So first of all, you start with the asset quality itself. So you can start with tokenizing a T-bill is different from tokenizing a stock in, I don't know, a very niche stock. And the quality of that underlying makes a difference. Then, in terms of how the tokenization process actually works, proof of reserves, what factors go in, we think that is very similar to stablecoins, actually. So we are not very worried about that, and our methodologies work with RWAs as well. The main problem we have with asset ratings is that the automation, really, because each asset is different. You need to have risk teams do proper due diligence and have like proper analysis together with the team, kind of like S&P does it, like traditional ratings, right? But with vaults are automated, like markets are simulations, they're running fast, we can do this daily, we can do this hourly. It's a much more dynamic product and easy to sell. So the key thing about RWAs is, will they be willing to go through that process, and will they be open to have this longer time to get a rating? Because our approach is we can have a simplified version that is very fast and based on our internal knowledge, and then if they want, they can do the proper rating process.